Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's programme, a humanitarian crisis in eastern Ghouta. This suburb of 400,000 civilians has been under siege since 2013 as Syrian-backed forces fight to oust the rebels. The persecution of the LGBT community in both Iraq and Syria. We hear the account of one man who fled to Lebanon 2 years ago. Also coming up, we'll meet Iran's godfather of surrealist art. Akbar Sadeghi is today exhibiting some 200 pieces in the country's Museum of Contemporary Art. We start with eastern Ghouta, where a dire humanitarian crisis is unfolding and the death toll continues to increase. Syrian government forces, propped up by Russia, have been conducting a major offensive on the rebel-held district. The United Nations, meanwhile, has said the ongoing combat has made it impossible to bring in aid or rescue the wounded.
Rubble as far as the eye can see. In the space of a few days, airstrikes by the Syrian regime have all but flattened the rebel-held enclave of Ghouta. For the 400,000 civilians trapped between the regime and the rebels, escape is all but impossible, and nowhere is safe, not even hospitals. Just like during the battle for Aleppo, the Syrian regime is relentless, sparing no one.
This child is from eastern Ghouta. He was brought here on Sunday and he died from suffocation because of a poisonous gas we haven't been able to identify. We're calling upon the world's organisations. What is this child's crime? Where are you? Our children are killed by gas.
It's not the first time the regime has been suspected of carrying out a chemical attack. Back in August 2013, the world saw in horror images of people suffering from the effects of sarin gas. For Bashar al-Assad, Ghouta is an important target, since it encompasses the eastern suburbs of Damascus, within range of rebel mortars that makes the capital vulnerable to shelling. Long an irritant to the loyalist camp, anti-Assad insurgents in eastern Ghouta have faced off against the Syrian army since the spring of 2013. But the situation within the enclave itself is complicated too. It's held by a mix of rebel and jihadist factions like the Islam Army and Tahrir al-Sham, an offshoot of Syria's al-Qaeda franchise. The Syrian regime and its Russian backers consider those groups terrorists and have vowed to stamp them out. They're pressing for a negotiated withdrawal of rebel fighters and their families, like the one that saw the government retake control of Aleppo.
Eastern Ghouta's trouble actually is the trouble of Idlib and most of all other ceasefire areas. That how you will separate the, let's say, so-called terrorist groups from the moderated rebels or FSA.
Residents fear the government is preparing for a full ground assault like the one it carried out in Aleppo in 2016, following a similar Russian-ordered humanitarian pause.
Let's now listen to a medic who's been on the ground in the besieged Syrian enclave, treating the wounded.
Right now, the situation is very difficult because of the cold weather. People have taken refuge in shelters. There are cases of malnutrition in these shelters and many people have breathing difficulties. Many people develop lung infections. Children, women, elderly people. People who have been in these shelters for days and days.
Staying with Syria, some 400,000 lives have been lost and many more wounded since the start of the 7-year conflict. Doctors in the northern province of Idlib are now turning to sport to help boost the morale of those with permanent scars. One hospital has even set up a football team for war amputees with some promising results. James Franey.
Brought together by war and their love of the beautiful game, a football team in Syria with a difference. These players are all amputees.
Lots of things are difficult, such as running, or sometimes when you see the ball in front of you and you can't reach it. Or sometimes it is right in front of me and I want to shoot with my left leg, then I remember it has been amputated.
This is Idlib, the last province in Syria not controlled by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The team of civilians and former rebels trains here 3 times a week, working on tricks, tactics and ball skills.
Since beginning training, I can do things I couldn't do before. I used to say it was too hard, but now I can lift a gas canister and other things.
This squad of 19 is managed by a rehabilitation centre at Idlib's specialist hospital. The head coach and physiotherapist says these games lift the spirits of his players.
The centre has the idea to train them psychologically and morally. We've gotten to a good level. The next step will be to get them into the sports centre, to play table tennis, and eventually get into the swimming pool.
War is never far away in Syria, but these players say this team has given them a new lease of life as they try to put their turbulent past behind them.
They've been dubbed some of the most difficult places in the world to be gay or transgender. Under the rule of the Islamic State group in both Iraq and Syria, the two countries became even more dangerous for the LGBT community. Being gay often meant intimidation, torture, or even a death sentence. France 24 met with one gay refugee who has fled from Iraq to Lebanon. Now, some viewers may find elements of his testimony disturbing.
My mother helped me flee Iraq as my family wanted me dead. They locked me in my room. They wanted to cut my throat. They said I'd brought shame on them. My father revealed my sexuality to one militia so they'd kill me.
19 years old and gay. This Iraqi man meets France 24 at an LGBT rights group in Beirut. He left his homeland 2 years ago after being threatened by Islamists.
They made lists. They threw gays into the middle of the street and beat them to death with concrete blocks. I had one friend who was kidnapped and tortured for 3 days. We found him dead next to a trash can. They had castrated him and stuck a knife inside his anus. They cut his body right up to the middle of his back.
While no official figures exist, rights groups in Beirut report of similar testimonies like this one. Lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender people who fled the Islamic State and other militant groups. Many seek help from the UN's refugee agency.
LGBTI refugees are often fast-tracked or prioritized for resettlement to third countries because we realize the vulnerabilities that they face. It essentially boils down to risks which place a refugee at a particular risk of being persecuted.
But until their request for asylum elsewhere is granted, they remain in Beirut. It's safer than the homes they've left behind, but not without other risks.
Finding work is a lot more complicated. That's why many get involved in prostitution. It makes them more vulnerable on 3 fronts, as sex workers, LGBT people and refugees.
Lebanon is more tolerant than most of its neighbors, but homosexuality remains illegal under its penal code, on the grounds that same-sex relations, quote, contradict the laws of nature.
We finished this edition of Middle East Matters with a segment on a much-celebrated Iranian artist. Ali Akbar Sadeghi's work is currently on display at the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art. But despite his long career spanning over 60 years, the artist remains little known outside of the Islamic Republic. Our correspondent went to meet the 80-year-old who likes to blend traditional Persian iconography with surrealism.
For much of 6 decades, Ali Akbar Sadeghi has walked into his studio soon after sunrise and painted until sunset. But it's only recently that Sadeghi started painting while listening to electronic music.
It makes me feel like working. It's very strange. The store where I buy the CDs asked me if I wanted any other music. I said no, just this. They were very surprised because I'm an old man.
Today, 80-year-old Sadeghi is one of Iran's leading contemporary artists, a prolific craftsman who has mastered more than a dozen mediums and sometimes created his own.
I never repeat myself. I go from one technique to another. I always wanted this excitement to be in my spirit and in my work.
In his nail series, Sadeghi uses carpentry skills he learned as a teenager to forge ancient Persian warriors. In his myth and math series, he decorates the gaze of Mona Lisa with a Persian mustache. Sadeghi plays with, but never challenges, Iran's conservative norms and often pays homage to the rich culture of ancient Persia.
We had a civilization that was perhaps the greatest in the world, and we have to take pride in it.
As a teenager obsessed with painting, Sadeghi's biggest challenges were his father and schoolwork.
My father was always against me painting. He wanted me to get an education. I failed 7th grade because all I did was paint, and he gave me a severe beating.
Eventually, neither his father nor his teachers could ignore Sadeghi's talent. He finished first in his class in college and launched a career that still goes strong today.
They ask me, how come you paint so many swords and war scenes? I say, this is part of human character, to fight until the last moment of life. There are so many things in this world we have yet to discover.
Sadeghi doesn't seem tired of discovering, and that's why his legend as an artist will likely keep growing for years to come.
Well, that's it for Middle East Matters this week. Don't forget you can reach out to us on both Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.